The Castle in the Attic by Elizabeth Winthrop. Chapter 14. William heard the crank of the windlass as the portcullis was raised. The heavy wooden doors were pushed slowly open by two soldiers, who marched across in front of him without raising their eyes to meet his. A third soldier stood waiting for him, lance at the ready.
"Your business, sir?"
he said. "I've heard the wizard is seeking a fool for his amusement. I've come to apply for the position," William said loudly, his voice echoing throughout the empty courtyard. Here and there he spied faces peeking out at him from behind the great stone columns, but when they caught him looking at them, they withdrew. The guard signaled that William was to follow him. They took the first door that led off the courtyard and turned their way down an endless spiral of stairs that seemed to lead into the center of the earth. The stairs were lit by smoking torches that left long black marks on the stone walls above them. For the first time since he'd come to the forest, William felt cold. He was glad he had not shed his tunic in the heat. The guard did not look back to see if he was still following, but kept up a steady pace down the curling stone steps. At last, when William began to grow dizzy from the downward twisting and the acrid smell of the torches, they came out into a small room.
"Wait here,"
the guard said. He knocked once and then twice more at a wooden door, which was opened almost immediately and then slammed shut behind him. William was left standing by himself, but in less than a minute the door opened a crack. A bony hand reached out and beckoned him inside. He entered a large hallway dimly lit by two torches on either side of a high-backed carved chair.
"Step forward, fool!" thundered the figure seated on the chair.
William did as he was told. He found himself face to face with an old man, dressed in a silver robe with a hood. They studied each other in silence. Lines creased the man's forehead, and his gray hair lay across the shiny skin of his head in thin, matted strands. His right shoulder twitched constantly as if it were jerking up to swat a fly off his ear. His eyes made William shiver. They darted about, never resting for too long on any one object. They were the eyes of a hunted man who understood that danger could come from any quarter. They missed nothing.
"I'm Alistair," the man announced. "Your name, fool?"
"Muggins," William replied. It was the first word that came into his head, the name of a clown he'd once seen in the circus.
"What can you do?"
the wizard asked, leaning forward to look more closely at his face. "I am an acrobat, sir. I can play the recorder. I can tell riddles." William stopped as the wizard made an impatient gesture at him.
"Enough!" he growled. "That will do, won't it, Calendar?"
"Aye, my lord," creaked a voice from the corner, and William looked over to see the bent shape of an old woman. "Order him to perform," she said. The wizard nodded at him. William stepped back to the entrance of the room. He would use the beginning of his routine for the meat. But no Arabians. He wasn't ready for that. For a moment he stood with his eyes closed, centering his body. He thought of Robert's voice. To succeed, William knew that everything else, the smoky room, the wizard's angry eyes, the guards' curious stares, had to drop away.
"Perform, fool!"
the wizard ordered, his deep voice bouncing off the walls of the room. Ready, go. Round off, whip back, reach for the back handspring. He had the rhythm and the speed for the second pass. Another round off, then a perfect layout somersault with a full twist. which was ruined only by the clatter of his falling dagger. The guard leaped forward and snatched it from the floor before William could retrieve it himself.
"Most interesting," the wizard said. "A fool who travels with a dagger."
William said nothing. He was sure the wizard could hear the pounding of his heart, but he did not let the fear show in his face.
"What do you think, Calendar?"
asked the wizard. The old woman shuffled forward and inspected the weapon, putting it up to her nose and sniffing it. "No blood," she muttered, handing it back to her master. "But how did he get past the dragon?"
"Well, fool, you heard the question,"
the wizard muttered. William opened his mouth and shut it again. He had no idea what to answer. He stared at his feet, hoping they would help him decide which answer was the safest one. Before he spoke, he heard the soldier's voice behind him.
"When he stated his business, we directed him to the side entrance, my lord. We knew you were looking for a fool."
The wizard's eyes came to rest for a moment on the soldier. Nobody in the room moved.
"Very well, then. We shall keep the dagger for you, young muggins," the wizard said. "That way you won't be tempted to use it, will you?"
"No, sir," William ventured warily.
"Come with me, fool. I have something to show you."
William picked up his belt and followed the silver robes. They reminded him for a moment of Sir Simon, but again he shook the thought away. Calendar scuttled along behind them, sniffing at him occasionally like a curious dog. They went out a back door behind the wizard's chair, down a sloping, narrow corridor, and through a series of stoutly fastened doors, each opened by a guard and closed again behind them. At last they arrived in a large gallery hall whose walls were lined with statues.
"These are my pets,"
the wizard said with an eerie smile.
"Take a closer look at them, fool."
This was the room that William had heard about, the place where the wizard displays his lead people. William walked slowly around the edges of the room, forcing himself to look into each face. He saw old men and children, fearful faces and kind ones, wide, staring eyes, arrested in the middle of a plea or a protest or a prayer. The wizard was talking to him, boasting about some of his best prizes, a visiting prince and a wily priest. When William came to the last two figures, he put his hand over his mouth to stifle his scream of horror. It was the Silver Knight and the son of the apple tree man. So the whispers he had heard on the road were true. His beloved Sir Simon had been defeated again. When the wizard came and stood beside him, William held himself very still. Even in the midst of his despair, he knew he must mask the fear and fury that raged within him.
"This is my most recent prize, an old enemy who has tried to take my kingdom before. It was rumored that he would return one day with a boy, and so he has, but neither one of them shall bother me again."
Alistair crowed.
"The Silver Knight has been defeated, and in honor of his destruction I have chosen to wear silver myself."
At that moment he put his hand up to his neck, and William caught a glimpse of the two medals hanging from the necklace. There at last was the token, the prize he had come all this way to get. It was so close now that he toyed with the idea of reaching up and snatching the medal from around the wizard's neck before anybody could stop him. Could he do it? He glanced about the room. The two guards, standing at the door, saw his look and took a step forward with their lances ready. Oh, he would have to bide his time. The old wizard fingered the woven ribbon nervously for a moment, and then tucked it out of sight again, as if he could read William's mind.
"You stole one of my precious little treasures from me, but I shall have it back some day,"
Alistair said, speaking now to Sir Simon's face, which was frozen in an expression of anger mixed with surprise. The wizard glanced at William with an odd smile.
"Come with me, fool. I have decided to let you stay because I need the sight of a new face to cheer me. This old crone annoys me, though I've gotten used to her company,"
he said, pushing Calendar out of the way.
"If you please me more, I shall add her to my gallery. But if you do not please me enough, I shall add you."
The wizard turned a withering glare on William, who looked away. He followed the silver-robed man back down the series of corridors, mechanically putting one foot in front of the other. With the Silver Knight imprisoned in lead once more, William was left alone to defeat the wizard. How was he ever going to do that? A soldier showed William to a small, dark room near the gallery.
"You're to take your meals in your room. The wizard does not sleep well, so you will become used to waking at all hours."
"It's so dark down here. I think I'll lose all sense of time anyway," William said wearily. "Are you my guard?" he asked, looking more closely at the soldier. The man's mouth was almost entirely hidden by a large white mustache. His face was stern and forbidding, but the eyes that looked at William from beneath the metal helmet were kind.
"Yes."
He looked as if he wanted to say more, but after a moment he turned abruptly on his heel and left the room. The door closed, and the bolts were shot across on the other side. William looked around his prison. The only light in the room came from 2 torches attached to the wall. His bed, a straw pallet on the floor, was shoved into one corner, and a rough table and stool stood in the other. He sat down on the stool and emptied the contents of his pouch onto the table. 1 recorder, 1 pair of binoculars, 1 stale piece of bread. That was it. "All right, Mrs. Phillips," he whispered to the wall. "I'm in the castle. And I'm all alone." With his head in his hands, he closed his eyes and tried to imagine her, sitting in her chamber in the castle, poking the needle in and out of the canvas, standing up to stir the fire. If he did not succeed here, she would wait for him from one day to the next, until all her food had run out, until she was too tired to walk to the gatehouse tower to watch for him, until... He shook his head to drive away his worst thoughts. At last, he put everything back in the pouch, and using it for a pillow, he went to sleep.